Welcome back. In this episode, we are going to take a look at conditionals or control flow statements and loops in Python. So this is the file we are going to use for this episode. It is called script04.py. So I have it open here in the Python console. Let me see if I can enlarge it. So this is the file. But as usual, this is not easy to read and it is not easy for presentation purpose. So I'm going to open it in the text editor where we are going to see a more readable version of the same file. Then I will switch to Jupyter Notebook or Jupyter Lab to run some of the code. So for your information, you can download a copy of this and other related files we have been using in this video series on this GitHub page. So I'm going to provide the URL in the video description. So when you head over to this page, you can download all the Python scripts by accessing the folder here. And then you can download other related files we have used by going to the data file folder. So with that said, let me open up the script in a text editor. So I'm using Sublime Text. You can open it in whatever text editor you are comfortable with. So here I have the script opened up in the Sublime Text Editor. And then we are going to talk about conditional statements, or sometimes called control flow statement and loops in Python. So this is where programming gets interesting, because this is where you are able to create logic and make decisions in your programming workflow. So to start with, there are a lot of operators you need to get familiar with before you are able to use a conditional statement or loops in Python. So usually the common ones are the equals, equal sign, the not equals, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. But there are so many other ones that are also equally important. And in Python, these operators are usually grouped according to whether they are arithmetic operators, some are Boolean operators, some are bitwise operators. And in fact, I have a link here. I'm going to open it up soon where you will look at a lot of different kind of operators. And also, if you have downloaded the book, The Byte of Python, there is a chapter on operators, which I'm going to show you in a moment. So, but first, let's switch to the website here and then take a look at what we have on that website. So on the website, you can see from the table of content, there are a lot of operators that are available in Python. And here on this website, an effort has been made to group them into arithmetic operators, comparison operators, equality operators, logical operators, bitwise, shift operators, assignment operators, ternary operators. So depending on which one you want to use, just click on the group and then it will take you to the section where the operators are. So here we have the addition, subtraction, multiplication. These are normal arithmetic operators. Then if you scroll down, you will look at the descriptions, the explanation of what the operators are capable of doing. So the next section is the relational operators, which are the greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. So this is another group. So if you scroll up, you can go to this section on equality operators, logical operators, and so many other ones. So but for this video, we are not going to make use of more than what you have seen here. So usually you just need a handful of operators to carry out your programming logic. So what I will strongly recommend that you go ahead, you look up the operators on this page. And also, if you have downloaded a byte of Python, there is a section on operators, which I will also advise you to look at. So on the book, A Byte of Python, there is a chapter on operators and expressions. So when you go to that chapter, you should be able to see how different operators are put to use. And then I think at the end, somewhere here, there is a section where the operators are summarized. So you can see all these different operators, and then you can see what they can do. So in most cases, these are what we use together with the conditional statements and the for loops or loops in Python to make decisions in our programming workflow. So there are actually 5 primitive conditional statements and loops in Python. 3 are conditional statements, while 2 are the loop are for loops. So the 3 primitive keywords for conditional statements are the if statement, elif statement, and then the else statement. While the 2 primitive keywords for loops are for loop and then the while loop. We'll take a look at loops later. For now, let's focus on the conditional or the control flow statements. So to start with, I'm going to make a simple assumption. Let's switch back to QGIS. So let's assume you have a friend. You have a friend somewhere in the US or somewhere in North America, and then you want to model the condition. You want to model his choice whether to travel to Africa or not. So if you go back to the script, this is what we are going to use to model to explain the conditional statements. So here I have a variable that I have used, that I've created. And then I think it's better I copy it to Jupyter environment so that we can run it. Yeah. So I'm going to switch to the Jupyter environment, and then I will just paste the variables I've created earlier on. So here we have a variable called traveling to Africa, and then the response is either yes or no, or it can be true or false. But at the moment it's set to yes. Then we also have another variable called destination, and then destination is Africa. So what I try to model here is this. Let me explain it better using a graphical interface. So assuming this is what I'm trying to model. This is the world map. We have a friend somewhere in the United States or somewhere in North America. This region, to be precise. So the friend need to make a decision, need to give us response whether he's traveling to Africa or not. If his response is yes, then we put yes, or if he's traveling to Africa, we can use true or false. So let's assume he's traveling to Africa. So we decide to put a yes for the response. That's why we have this variable as yes. And then the destination he's traveling to. Let's assume his destination is to Nigeria. So that is why we now created the variable destination. We assigned Nigeria to that variable. So based on this response, we want to make use of the if statement or the elif statement or the else statement. So let's go back to the note. So the first statement there is to test if the response to traveling to Africa is yes, then we should print a statement that says have a safe trip to, then we'll now add the destination, which is Nigeria. So let me copy it back to Jupyter Notebook and then run it. So you can see if traveling to Africa is yes, then we should print out this statement. So and if you run it, if you define the variable, then you run the if statement, you see that we have a safe trip to Nigeria. So this destination is coming from this variable, while the if statement is testing if this is actually yes or not. So how about if you change this to something like maybe no? Let's see what will happen. If I run the second cell, you see that nothing happens. This is because the condition is not true. So this variable traveling to Africa is set to is checking for yes in the if conditional statement, while it is set to no from above. So if the condition is not true, nothing will happen. But if you want something to happen, if the condition tested is not true, then that is where you need to make use of the elif or the else statement. Let's copy from the note. So I'm going to copy this part back to the Jupyter Notebook. Let me give us more room. So here you can see we have made use of the elif and then the else statement. So this gives us the ability to make use of to check multiple conditions. So traveling to Africa is testing for yes in this case. Remember, we have changed it to no somewhere here. So traveling to Africa is testing for yes. So if this condition is true, it will print out this statement. But if it is not true, it will move to the next line and then check for elif. So the elif gives us the ability to test for another condition. So we'll still test for if the traveling to Africa is set to no, then we'll print out this statement. Then at the end, we have another else statement. So the else statement is usually if the first two fails, then the else will definitely print. So the else statement is usually the last in the if block statement. And then take note of the indentation. I believe we have talked about indentation in the previous video, so you should be mindful of this indentation within the if block of code. So remember, we have changed the traveling to Africa to no. So let's see the part of the code that will be printed here. So I'm guessing this is the part that will be valid because traveling to Africa is set to no. So this will fail, and then this will be valid, and then we should have this output. So let's see if that is correct. So run it, and then you can see. So traveling to Africa is set to no. So it has to print out this statement that says, oops, please consider coming to Africa. So let's assume we change the response of our friend was different from yes or no. So if it is not yes, this becomes invalid. If it is not no, this becomes not true. It becomes invalid, and then this will have to be printed out. So let's see. So let's say maybe the response was set to something like not sure. So our friend is not sure whether he's coming to Africa or not. So he doesn't want to give a definite response of yes or no. So he set to not sure. Then by the time you run this, you see that the part of the code that we printed should be please choose yes or no as your response. So you go back and change the response to maybe yes, and then run, then test. You see that the first statement is the one that gets executed. So this is the whole idea behind the if else conditional statement. So you test for a condition. If condition is true, then you execute a statement. You test for a condition. If condition is true, you execute a statement. So depending on which one, you can have multiple conditions to test for in the statement. So let's go back to the note to check for the next exercise. So you can have more than one condition, as we have seen from above. So, and the use of elif is optional. So here we have more than one condition. So instead of just testing for one variable, so we're just checking one variable in the previous code. But here we have multiple variables, we can test for multiple variables. And this is where you make use of the operators. The AND operator is an example of logical operator. So this is where you begin to make use of operators. Already we have seen the double equal to equal operator. And then we are now seeing another operator in action. So let's copy the code, take it back to Jupyter Notebook. I paste it here. Then I make sure that my indentation are in order by removing this special character. So here we are checking for more than one condition. Traveling to Africa is yes. If this is equal to yes, and then destination is equal to Nigeria, then we should print out this statement. Else, we should have a different statement printed out on our console. So let's run and see what we have. So you can see because the variable is set to yes, traveling to Africa is set to yes, and then destination is set to Nigeria. So let's assume we changed it. Let me copy it here so that we can have it close and then we can mess around with it. So let's assume we change this to maybe Ghana. So instead of having welcome to Nigeria, we should have a different printout on the console because this statement, this traveling to African variable is set to yes, which is correct. But this operator and will not be valid since the destination variable is changed to Ghana, not Nigeria. So it means the whole of this statement will not be true. And then we'll have to, the code block will have to run the last line, which is the else statement. So this becomes invalid, given that destination is Nigeria, is Ghana, not Nigeria. So let's test it. So as you can see, so this is not valid because of this AND operator. And then the whole of this if statement becomes not true, then it becomes false. Then the else part has to be executed as seen below. But if you change this operator to something like OR, the OR operator. So the OR gives option. Either the first is correct or the second is correct. So if this first, if one of them is true, then it should be able to run the execute the code below it, within the if statement. So let's see how the OR operators work. So as you can see, the OR is quite different from the AND. So the OR is optional. Either one of them has to be true. One of the conditions has to be true. While AND is strictly both has to be true. So that is why I encourage you to study the operators and learn how they work so that you can make use of them in your conditional code block. So let's move to the next. So we can also have nested if statement. That is having a multiple if statement within if statement. So here I have an example where I have just one if statement nested in another if statement. So here we have nested if statement. We have the first if statement, which is the main one. So the first if statement has the elif and then the else statement below it. Then we now have the we now have another if statement nested within it. So this is the first if statement is checking if traveling to Africa is yes, if our friend is traveling to Africa. Then if he's traveling to Africa, then we want to execute this part of the code. So recall that earlier on, we usually just use a print statement below the code, below the line. So you can make use of any kind of code. Any kind of code can run below the if statement. So in this case, we are running a nested another if statement. So if traveling to Africa is yes, then we are also checking for another condition, whether the destination is Nigeria. So if destination is Nigeria, then we want to print welcome to Nigeria. But if the destination is not Nigeria, then we want to print this statement, have a safe trip to that destination. But if our friend is not traveling to Africa, that is, this option is set to no, then the whole of this whole of this code will not be executed. The execution will shift to the next line within the if block statement, which is this. Then we'll also check if traveling to Africa is no. If the response given by a friend is set to no, then we print out this statement. But if the response is neither yes or no, then we'll have to execute this last line of the code. So let's test the script. So I'm just copying the variable definitions into this cell so that you will see the execution of the code. So you can see in this case, we got have a safe trip to Ghana. So the part of the code that was executed is this, which is the if statement nested within the main if statement. So traveling to Africa was set to yes. So that means this was valid, and then we need to execute the code. The program will now execute the code below it. But had it been the response was set to something else, let's say this program was set to something like okay. So traveling to Africa is set to that was the response given by our friend from North America. So the program, the if statement will check if the response is yes. So in this case, it is not yes. So this part of the script will not be executed. Then it will move to the next block of code within the if conditional statement. So the next condition we're checking for is if the variable traveling to Africa is set to no. So the response is still not no. So that means this will not be executed because it is not valid. Then we are left with the last option, which is the else statement. So the else statement must be executed no matter what the response is, as long as the response did not suit the first and then the second condition, or even the third condition, or any amount of condition that you have. So let's run it. So as you can see, we have your response is not recognized. This is because the condition we're checking is for yes and then for no. If had it been want to check for another condition that say then we could also add another elif statement just before the else statement like this. So let me just copy this line to make it faster. So let's say we want to check for another condition that says elif traveling to Africa is set to then we should have another print statement that prints below that. And of course, the statement should not read that. It should read something else. Maybe let's say, what do you mean by let's say what do you mean by Yes, something like that. So if the response on the question traveling to Africa is set to we should have this. So let's try the code, run, and then as you can see, we now have that part of the code executed. So you can have as many conditions as you want to test for. You can test for any number of conditions, and also you can nest as many if statements within the if block. But usually I will advise you not to make your code complicated. At least if you need to nest if statements within an if statement, you shouldn't go beyond the 3 level of nesting. Even though you can go for as many as you want, but I strongly recommend that you keep your code simple. If the condition you are checking for, or if the logic you are working on has to go beyond 3, then I will advise you to split the code, split your script into parts for readability sake, and to make it easier for future developers or future programmers that will be working on your code. So let's move on to the next section of the script. So in the next section, we are going to take a look at coordinate, longitude and latitude coordinate to the north or southern meridian, or to the east or west of the equator. So in this code block, we defined a latitude, and then we set the value of the latitude. Then we are now using the if conditional statement to check if the value is to the north of the equator or to the south. So the next exercise here is to use another variable. So in this case, we have longitude and latitude. So we need to check the longitude and latitude, whether they are to the south or north of the equator, or they are to the west or east of the central meridian. So here I have downloaded this line of graphical from this URL, which is on natural art data. I'm going to open up the website for you, and then you can download it. So here on this page, you have the lines of graphical. You can download all, or you can download anyone you want to work with. But here in this exercise, I'm going to make use of this 30 degrees lines of graphical. And then also you can download these geographical lines. So this is the tropical, this will show the tropical, and then the polar cycle, the equator, and then the international date lines. So just download a copy. You are free, or you can head over to my GitHub page. Inside the shapefile folder, I have a copy of those files, just in case if these websites are no longer active. But I doubt if the website will not be active for ages. So I have a copy here. You can easily get a copy. So let's load it into QGIS, and then I will now demonstrate what I want to do with it. So here you select the zip file, then you add. So I'm just interested in the 30 degrees lines of graphical. So select it, click on add. Then you can select the geographical lines, open, add it. I'm just interested in the shapefile. Select open. Then you can now close it. So here I have the lines. You can zoom to extend to see everything. So let me edit the symbology. So double click on the layer, and then the thickness of this line, let me make it bolder. I think that should be fine for us. Apply. Yes, that is okay. Then for the geographical lines too, let me open up the properties and then make it thicker a little. So here we go. So I'm interested in the line of the equator, the equatorial line, and then the central meridian line. So which I can get if I open up the attribute of the graticle. And then as you can see from the directions. So let me select the equator and then the central meridian. They are the ones that will have degrees at 0, 0. So if I select and then go back to the map, and then as you can see, we have the equator and the central meridian selected. So these are the two important lines. I think it will be good if I label. Let me use this display to label the line so that we will see what we are talking about easily. So label, and then I'm going to label based on the attribute field called display. So let me click on apply, and then let's see. Okay, I think this is better. So from the label you can see that the equator is 0, the central meridian is 0. So these lines that goes towards the east and then the west, they are the meridians. So this is the 30 degrees meridian, 30 degrees west, 60 degrees west, 90 degrees west. So at the interval of 30, we have 30 degrees east, 60, 90, and so on, up to 180. Then from the equator, we have at the interval of 30, we have from the equator, which is 0, we have 30 south, 60 south. We have a 30 north, 60 north. So these are the lines. So what I want to model here is given a value of either longitude or latitude. We want to check if the line is above, as you can see from my cursor. If the line is above the equator, so the line of latitude will now read as being in the northern hemisphere. But if the value of the latitude is a negative form, if it is a negative sign or is less than 0, then the line should read in the southern hemisphere. So it's a simple logic, which I know that as a GIS analyst, you are familiar with it. But the problem we have is how to model it programmatically. So this is the line of equator, which is 0. So anything above 0 is in the northern hemisphere, while anything below 0, that is anything that is negative sign, is in the southern hemisphere. So that is what we have here. So we have this. So we are trying to model the latitudes. So the latitude value, if the latitude value is greater than 0, we should print out that the latitude value is in the northern hemisphere. But if the latitude value is less than 0, that is in negative form. Any negative value is less than 0. Take note of the operators we are using. So these are the logical operators. So we should print, if it is less than 0, we should print out that the value is in the southern hemisphere. But what about if the latitude value is equal to 0? So if the value is equal to 0, we should print out that the latitude value is on the equator. So let's run the code. I hope my explanation is clear up to this point. Because if I go back to the QGIS environment, that is what is obtainable, that is the true. From the line of equator, anything above 0 is in the northern hemisphere, while anything below 0 is in the southern hemisphere. And that is why you see that in some countries, the latitude value will never be negative, while in some countries, the whole latitude values are in negative form. The same concept is applicable to the central meridian, that is for longitude. So the longitudes to the west are in negative, while the longitude to the east are in positive. So from the central meridian to the west, you have negative. Then to the east, you have positive. And that is why all the longitude values in North America, they are all in negative because they are to the west of the central meridian. So let's go to Jupyter Notebook. Then here I'm going to paste what I copied earlier for the latitude. So latitude here is set to 0. So if the latitude is greater than 0, then we want our program to print out the value is in the northern hemisphere. But if the latitude is less than 0, that is in negative form, is a negative sign, then we should print out the latitude is in the southern hemisphere. Else, it means the value is what? Is equal to 0. If the value is equal to 0, then it means that the latitude value is on the equator exactly. So let's run this and see the output. So here we have an error, which is on line 7. So what is the problem with line 7? I think we have problem with the indentations. So let me clean it up. So let me run it again. So we have something is wrong with our code, and then we need to check it. So line 7, this is line 7. Okay, in line 7, we don't need to have this. You cannot have this condition. You cannot check for a condition on using the else statement. So we have to change this to elif statement. And then probably we'll have another, we should have another final condition for the else. So whenever you are making use of else, you don't check for the condition. So if you have to check for the condition, you need to make use of elif. But if you need to check for a condition, if you don't need to check for a condition, that is, you want to set the last option, you want to set the last condition, whatever condition is, then you need to, that's when you make use of else. So let's run this now. And you can see now we now have our results as, since the latitude is set to 0, the result is latitude value is on the equator. How about if you change it to maybe 12.5609? So this is a positive latitude. So we should expect that the latitude is greater than 0, and then we should have this result printed out. So we run, and then you can see now that the latitude is in the northern hemisphere. But what about if I add the negative sign? What do we get? So we should have that the latitude is in the southern hemisphere. So you can see this is how we make use of the conditional statement to model problems programmatically. So what about if we change this to, let's say, something like a string, wrong string, or wrong text? So if I run it, what will happen? If I run it, you get error. Why? Because we are using the this operator, which can only work on a number or a floating number or a double number. So we are using it on a non-number. So here latitude is set to a string, and then we are now making use of the logical operator to now compare it with a number, which is not possible. So that is why we are getting this error. So it's just like this. If I say 2 is greater than 8, if I run it, I have false. But if I change this 2 to a string, maybe if I just enclose it to a string, and then if I run it, I will have this type error. So later on in this video series, we're going to look at errors in Python. But here, the operator does not support comparing a string and a number. So if you need to make use of the greater than or less than operator, it has to be a number. So you cannot have a string. So later on, we're going to see how we can avoid this. We're going to see how we can make use of some functions that will enable us to overcome some of these errors in our programming workflow. So here has to be a number. The number can be anything from 1 point and then to negative signs, maybe minus 34, and then we'll have a different result, which should be in the Southern Hemisphere. So let's go back to our note to see what we have next. So you can do the same thing. I will encourage you to do the same thing for the longitude. But in the case of longitude, here will be east and then here will be west. Then, of course, remember that this has to be L if not else. Then here, instead of equator, you have the meridian there. So try your hand on it, and then at least you should be able to model that scenario within the Python environment. So what we have next is handling invalid coordinates. So already I showed you how we got error when a user provided an invalid coordinate. So if you provide a string here, let's assume you convert this to string, we'll have this error as we have seen earlier. So let's see how we can handle it. Even though this will not be the perfect way of handling it, later on we are going to talk on a topic where we can handle such kind of error properly. So here we try to handle it by checking the type, and then we ended up creating a nested if statement, another nested if statement. So we use the type function to check the type of the latitude provided. So let me copy the variable down to this cell. So here I define the variable. The variable is not a number, it's not a floating number or an integer this time around, it's a string. So the if statement is checking for the type. So if the type is a float, or the type of the latitude provided is equal to an integer, then we should run this block of code. Else, we should prompt the user to that the latitude value provided is not valid. That is this statement. So this block of code is exactly the same thing that was here. So we only nested it in another if statement, which check for the condition whether the type of the provided latitude is a float or an integer. If it is not a float or an integer, then we should not perform the operation on it. But if it is either a float or an integer, remember the OR operator. The OR operator will check either this or this. If either of these conditions are true, then it will execute the code below it. But if it is not true, then it will execute the else part. And then recall that when you're using else, you don't check for condition. The else will always run if the conditions above fail. So let's run it first before I demonstrate. So you can see we are getting this is not a valid latitude value. This is because this is a string, not a floating number. So but if I remove the quotes around the value, so this is now a negative latitude value. So a negative latitude value is valid, and the type of this should be a float. So it means this condition is satisfied. Then it will now move to the next if block statement. And the next if block statement will now check if the value of latitude is greater than 0, then it should run this. Or if the value of latitude is less than 0, then it should run this. If the value of latitude is equal to 0, then it should run this. So let's see what will happen. So as you can see, this is a valid type, which is a float. So this condition is true. So it will automatically skip the last part, and then it will run the code, the nested if statement within it. And then the value of latitude is less than 0. which is a negative sign. So it means the latitude is in the southern hemisphere, and as you can see from the result, we have the latitude is in the southern hemisphere. So this type, in case if you have not used this type before, type is just a function that check for the type of a given object. So let me just demonstrate it for you. If you have say type, which is a function, then you can call any number or any object within it. So you can see the type of 9 is an integer. So if I remove this and then put 9 here, then it means this condition will be satisfied, and then this code block will be executed. So if I run it, you can see that because we are using OR here, so the integer part was satisfied, and then the nested if statement got executed. And since 9 is greater than 0, this is the part that gets executed, that the latitude value is in the northern hemisphere. So if I check for the type of the negative 34.98 we did earlier, you can see that the type is a float. And that was why when we used it, the floating part was satisfied. Because of the OR operator, this was ignored, and then the nested if statement was executed. So that is that. So let's see what we have in our note. So the next thing in our note is the use of ternary operators for inline conditional expression. So of course you can have an inline if statement just like this. So let me copy it into the Jupyter environment. So here we have a variable that is assigned to 7. So the number 7, this is an integer 7. So here on one line, we are printing good morning. If the variable my time is less than 12, else print good day. So if I run, you can see I have a good morning. If I increase this to let's say 70, let's see what will happen. I have a good day because this condition is not met. So here, this shows that you can have a statement like this on one line. So if statement does not necessarily have to be indented in block of code, as we have been doing earlier. You can have everything just on a single line in this kind of expression using the ternary operators. So let's go back to the note and see what we have next. So next on our note, we have if name is equals to main. So usually this is something you come across when you are looking at other people's code, and later on you will definitely come to use it. But here I'm not going to use an example because it will be better explained when we are working in the section of modules. So when you create a Python file and you don't want the Python file to get executed when it is imported in another file or in another program, then this is when you now make use of the if main is equals to main statement. So if I copy this to the Jupyter lab environment, you see that if main is equals to main, then we can now have something to execute. Maybe I would say print something to execute. So this is a variable, is a default variable that comes with every Python file. If you save a Python file, the name underscore name underscore should equal to main. So if this condition is satisfied, then run the code below within the if block statement. So if I run this, you see that This is a Jupyter environment, and then the condition was true, and that is why it is running it. But had it been this is a Python file that was imported, assuming we name this file, the name of this file is script 01. So had it been we imported it in another environment as import script -01. This is just an example. Later on, we are going to talk about the import statement and the modules and packages in a different video lesson. So, but here I just want to explain the concept of this if statement. You see, it's very common in Python programming, and you come across it. So, if you imported this file in another program, so because you imported it in another program, this condition will never be true, and then you can never the file will never get executed. You can only make use of the functions or the classes defined in the file. So this is assume this is a .py file, not a Jupyter notebook or Jupyter lab. This must be a Python file. So later on in the section where we are going to talk about modules and packages. So we are going to talk about modules and Python packages. We will explain more on this. But if you like, you can take a look at more explanation in the reference materials I provided. Most especially if you look at Python 101, the textbook, there's a section, there's a chapter that explains what this is. So as you can see here in chapter 4 of the Python 101 book, you should have this section on if statement. So you can go ahead, read it, and then get familiar with it before we talked about it in the next video. So it's a simple concept, and then it's a good one. So this is the book I'm talking about by Michael this school. So Python 101. So let's see what we have next. So the next thing we need to talk about is for loops. So as I've mentioned earlier, we have two primitive loops in Python. The first is the for loop, while the second is the while loop. So let's start with the for loop. So here I defined a couple of variables which are assigned to lists. So we are going to make use of them to discuss the for loop. So the first example here is a simple loop. So the syntax of a loop is something like this: for, then you create an arbitrary variable, then in a sequence. So the sequence can be anything. The sequence can be a list, as we have here. It can also be a dictionary. It can be a set. It can be a tuple. It can also be a string. So you can loop virtually over any kind of sequence you can think of. So, but here I'm using a list as an example. So let's copy this to the Jupyter environment. So here I'm going to add a little bit space so that we can work on the loops. So here I've defined a couple of variables, and then I've assigned them to different list objects. So the first one is country name. We have Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Germany, Japan, none, Egypt. So we want to print out the content of this list. So to do that, you make use of loop. So for loop enables you to iterate over a sequence in a number of time. So for, then you create an arbitrary variable, and then you use the in operator, then the sequence. So this sequence can be anything. It doesn't have to be a list. It can be a dictionary. It can be a string. It can be whatever. But here I'm using a list for demonstration sake. So for country, which is an arbitrary variable, And this name can be anything. It can be X, it can be Y, it can be whatever you want. But it's strongly recommended that you make use of a name that makes sense. At least it is a convention to make use of a name that will make sense to future programmers or future developers that will be reading your code. So for countries in the list of country names, so country names, we could have added S here, but it doesn't matter. Name or names, it will still work fine. So for country in country name, print out the country. So in the first loop, the name of the country will be Nigeria. So we want to print it out. In the second loop, the name of the country will be Cote d'Ivoire. We want to print it out. In the next loop, that's the third loop, the name of the country will be Germany. So we want to print it out continuously up to the end. So if I click on run, you can see we have Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Germany, here, Japan. We have none. This is a non data type. We have none printed out. We have Egypt, which is the final. We have Egypt printed out. So this is the simplest form of loop. So you just want to loop over a sequence and then print out the content. So earlier on I mentioned that the sequence can be anything. It can be a list, it can be a tuple, it can be a string, it can be a dictionary, it can be a set, just any type of sequence. So let me demonstrate it on a string, for example. Let's say we have a string Nigeria and they want to print out the content. So I can just say for maybe X in the string Nigeria. Then we want to print out X, which is just the arbitrary variable or a temporary variable. So in the first loop, X will be N. Then in the second one, X will be I. Next X will be G, and then it will print them out in that order. Let's see. So as you can see, for loop works on a string. So it also works on dictionary, it also works on a set, it also works on tuple, and so on. So let's go back to our notes and see what we have next. So just the way we have a nested if statement, we can also have nested for loop. So here we have two dictionaries. One is code, that's for coordinates, and then the next one is country, where we have three countries. So we'll have Nigeria, Ghana, and then Morocco. And then we use the nested for loop to loop through the countries, and then also loop through the coordinates. So we want to print out the name of the country, then the latitude and the longitude. The name of the country, then the latitude and the longitude. The name of the country, then the latitude and the longitude. So let's copy it and run it in the Jupyter environment. So here I'll paste, then I'll make sure that the indentation is correct by checking it. So here I have the first list, which is just two values of latitude and longitude. Then we'll have countries. So we created a nested for loop. So the first loop is looping through the countries. We have two countries here. We can have more. Let me actually add more countries. So here I'm going to add some couple of ones. Maybe I will add China. Then maybe I will add another one, maybe India. Then maybe another one, maybe Thailand or Taiwan, or maybe just Tunisia. Then maybe another one, maybe Japan. So we have more countries. So I want to loop through the countries while I print out the longitude and the latitude of each country. So the latitude, the coordinate list is just a string, not the actual latitude and longitude values, just to demonstrate the concept. So if I pick a country and I want to work on the latitude and the longitude. If I pick the second country, I want to work on the latitude and the longitude. If I pick the third country, I want to work on the latitude and the longitude continuously up to the end. So this is what this for loop is going to do. So if I click on run, you can see we have Nigeria, the latitude, Nigeria, the longitude, Ghana, which is the second country, the latitude and then the longitude. Then Morocco, which is the third country of the latitude and then the longitude. China, which is the fourth item in the country list. We have each latitude and then each longitude. So just imagine that instead of printing it out, you are going to perform some operations, arithmetic operations, or some conversions on it. You can also, I think it would be good if you add space or line. So let me show you a trick. So after printing the first set of countries, latitude and longitude, we want to have a space or a line separating the country from the next country. We'll have space or line separating the country from the next country. So that's what I want to do. So I'll just use a simple print statement where I'm going to print maybe dash. Then maybe I'll print it a multiple times. Times, this is the multiplication operator, maybe 10 times. So let's see what the output will look like. So you can see we have a fantastic output, but we are having a wrong output. I wanted the countries to be together before the printer, before the line is printed. So Nigeria latitude and longitude should be together before this separation. Ghana latitude and longitude should be together before the separation. So to do that, it means this print statement have to be outside the second for loop, which is like this. So just remove the indentation. The indentation should be in the first for loop, not in the nested for loop or the second for loop. So if I do that, I have a clean output just like that. So if I just want the line or this dash line to appear just at the end, then it means this has to be outside the loops entirely. And then when I do that, I can see that I only have the line outside the last after the last country is displayed. So if I indent into the first loop, I have that. If that is not what I want, if I want it to be under each output, then I indent into the second for loop, which should be like this. So depending on what you want, depending on how you indent. So this is a good concept and you should take note of this. So this is how to embed, or this is how to nest a for loop within a loop. So you can have so many loops nested into each other, but from my experience, I would advise you not to have a lot of nested for loops, at least for readability sake. If you are working in a logic that needs several for loops, I would advise you to break your code into sections. You can break your code into functions or break them into different parts or modules instead of nesting, having 10, 11, 12, or 20 for loops nested into each other. It's not a good practice, and it makes it difficult for others to read and interpret your code. So let's move on to the next topic in the script file. So the next thing we have on the script file is the use of else statement inside a loop. So the else statement is also valid when you're working in a loop. So as you can see here we have a country names, and then we have define a loop that loops through the country list. At the current iteration, if the name is equal to Japan, then we want to print the country is found. Then we break. Then we print other countries. Then finally, else. The else statement is printed out. So the concept of the else statement in the if works the same as the for loop. So it is usually what gets printed out at the end. So let me copy it to the Jupyter environment and then explain it a little bit further. So back in the Jupyter environment, I paste, and then the else statement is also valid when you're working in the for loop. So here we have list of countries. Then we want to check if the country name Japan is found. Then we want to break out of the for loop. So later on, I will talk about the break statement. So this break statement will break out the for loop. Remember what we did here. The for loop will loop through the entire content of the sequence or the iterable. So, but if you don't want the for loop to loop through from beginning to the end, you want it to stop at a point, then that's where you make use of the break statement. So later on, we are going to talk about it. I will talk in detail about it. But for now, just understand that the break will break out of the for loop. So here we are checking if the loop in this list is Japan. Then we want this statement to be printed out, and then the code should break out. But if it is not, then it means it is going to print out the name of the country. Else, that is this part, if this part is not valid, if the program breaks out and it's not valid, then it means this final part will be executed. So maybe if I run it and then you see the output, you understand what I'm talking about. So you can see, because this part of the statement was valid, this conditional statement was valid, it found a country called Japan. Then it has to print out country found, and then it breaks out of the for loop. So there's no need to print out this statement. But if, assuming this was not found, then it means it's going to print out the entire names of the countries. Let's modify the list. Maybe let's change this list to, from Japan to, let's change it to maybe China. So we are checking for the condition if the current country name in the loop is Japan. So in this case, there's no longer that Japan is missing. So it means throughout the for loop, from beginning of the list to the end, this condition will never be met. So it will keep executing and then printing out the country names as we have started from the beginning. So if I run, you see that it printed out all the country names from beginning to the end, and then including the last option, which is country not found. So the importance of the break statement is that you are able to check for condition, and then you are able to truncate the loop whenever you want. So let's assume you have over 100 countries here, and you don't want to perform the operation on the entire countries. You want the operation to stop when a certain condition is met. Then that is where the break statement comes into play. So we are going to see more example on the break statement later on. So let's go back to the notes and see what we have. So back in the script note, the next thing we need to talk about is writing several repeated texts onto the console. So here we have we are making use of the range function. So range is a built-in function, and it gives a range of values from 0 to the specified value. So here is 20. It means it's going to run from 0 to 20 or 0 to 19 if I'm not mistaken. Let's copy it to the Jupyter environment and then execute the code. So here I have it. Let me correct my indentation. So if I run it, let me run it before explaining it. So if I run it here, I have this string printed 20 times or 19 times. I think the range function doesn't include the number. It doesn't include the last number. Let me test it out here. So I will copy this. Then I'll just print out the value of x to be sure of what I'm saying. Yeah, so the range function starts from 0, as you can see 0, and then it ends on the last number before the specified value here. So since we have 20 here, it doesn't include 20. It's because it started from 0, it has to end on 19. So this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 19. But the entire count is 20. Remember that in Python, index reading starts from 0, not 1. There are some programming languages that start their counting from 1, 2, 3, like R. The R programming language starts its index from 1, and some other programming languages. But in Python, the index starts from 0, not 1. So since it started from 0, it has to end at 19, not 20. So if you want it to end on 20, it means you need to change this to 21. So by the time you run it, the index starts from 0. You have 20 here, but the entire count will be 21 because it started from 0. So this is how the range functions works. And then the range function has the ability of specifying the starting and then the ending or the step. Yeah. So this is from the documentation you can see that you can start, stop, and then the step. So if you just specify just one value, it means that is the stop. But if you specify 1, then maybe 2. So this will be the start, and then this will be the stop. So as you can see, it started from 3, not 0, and then it stops at 20, which will be 19. So if you add the third parameter, let's say 2. So it means it will start. This is start, stop, and then this is step. If you press Shift tab to check the documentation, this is the start. I think it's better if you can copy it. I'll copy it here. Then I'll just add it as a comment. So the first parameter is start, the second one is stop, while the last one is the step. So if I run, you see that the start is 3, then at the step of 2, from 3 I'll have 4, 5. Then at the step of 2, from 5 I'll have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And so up to the last stopping number, which is 20. But it will not include 20. It will stop at 19. So that is how the range function works. You can look up the Python documentation on how the range function works. So here we are just interested in using the for loop to loop over the range of this number and then print out a certain string onto the console. So we have successfully done that by printing out this text. I love QGIS Python programming 19 times. Sorry, 20 times. This should be 20. But the index starts from 0. So that is that. Let's go back to the note and then see what we have. So the next thing is problem solving. So this, I will not treat this in this video because the video is getting longer than expected. So I will definitely create another video to solve this problem. So this is going to be a mini project we are going to solve using what we have learned above. So this is the second problem solving mini project we are going to solve in another video. Then the next thing we have to talk about here is the while loop. So the concept of the while loop is similar to what we have in the for loop. The only difference is that in while loop, you loop until a specific condition is met. While in for loop, you loop a number of times. For example, if you're looping over a list that has 20 items, it means you are going to loop 20 times. But in the case of while loop, you don't have a predefined items to loop over, but instead you are looping until a condition is met. So here we have, let me copy to the Jupyter environment and then explain it further. So if I copy it here and I paste it here. So to explain this, you see that here I created a variable for as the initial elevation of a point. So assuming this is the elevation value of a point and then it's set to 1. So to loop while the elevation is less than a certain value, let's say 10 in this case, then perform an operation. So in this case, the operation we're performing is just to print out the elevation value. Then at the end, we are now increasing the value of the elevation. So here, this is just a shorthand way of writing something that would have looked like this. Elevation should equals to the same elevation plus 1. So if you need to add a variable to itself, so you can use this. So it's also applicable to subtraction, addition, multiplication, and so on, and other mathematical or arithmetic operators. So note that we have this line. This is the line that will increase the value of this elevation. So while loop will loop forever until the elevation is less than 10. If the elevation is greater than 10 or equal to 10, it means this condition will not be true. Then the while loop will stop. Else, it will continue to loop until this condition is met. So while, then the condition, then whatever expression you want to execute. So let's run it and see. So as you can see, here we have we are just printing out the elevation value. So the while loop will loop forever if you remove this. If you remove this, it will continue to print the elevation value because there is nothing to increment the elevation value to pass 10 to break out from the while loop. So you should be mindful of this. And by the time you do that, you need to have to shut down or close down the Jupyter environment to be able to exit the while loop. So it won't harm your computer, but it will continue to print out forever until you restart the environment, the Python environment you're working in. So we can change this. Maybe let's say the elevation is 4, 5, 6. Then we want to check the elevation. As long as the elevation is less than 500, we should continue to print. But here I will change it to maybe 6 instead of 1 so that it will be faster. So if I run, it will run and then it will increment the elevation to 6. As long as the elevation is less than 500, it will continue to print out. But If it is more than 500, then it will break out from the while loop. Let's try one and see how far we go. So with one, you can see we have more records or more numbers printed out. So the concept of while loop is you want to loop until a certain condition is met. That is just the difference, but the concept is the same thing with that of the for loop. So let's check our Python script to see what we have next. So the next item on the script is the break, continuous, and then the pass statements. So as I've mentioned earlier on that the break is used to break out of a loop statement. So the continuous statement is used to skip the current loop item and then continue to the next iteration. Then we have the pass statement. The pass statement is used to ignore the loop entirely, because you cannot write an empty loop. In order for you to write the loop without error, you need to use the pass statement within the loop code block. So let's see it in action in the Jupyter environment. So here I'm going to start with the break statement. So I'll copy the section, go back to the Jupyter environment, then paste it. So here I have the for loop. So this is a temporary variable, and then the variable is checking in this object. So this object has not been defined yet, but if I go back to the notes, this is African countries. So for Afri in African countries. So let me define the African countries. So here I have the list of countries by continent. So under the African countries is a list that has all the countries in Africa. So as you can see, it's a very big list. I think we have about 52 countries in Africa. So if I define the variable here, so this is African countries. If I copy it, let me check the length to be sure of the figure I mentioned earlier. So from the length is just a function to change the length of a list. So here we have 54 names of 54 countries in this list, which is roughly the number of countries in Africa. So having defined the variable, here we need to loop inside the variable and then check if the condition of the current country name is equal to Egypt. Then we'll break out of the for loop. Before now, I've explained what the break is. So basically, that is what it does. It breaks out of a for loop. So if I run it, you see that the countries are printed from the beginning, which is Algeria, Angola, Benin, Botswana, continuously up to where we have Egypt. So after Djibouti, we have Egypt. So since the condition was met here, then it breaks out of the for loop. So for Africa, for Afri variable in African countries list, if the condition is met, then break. So let's demonstrate it for maybe another country. So let me copy it just for more clarity. If I paste, so I'm defining the for loop for country. I can change this variable to maybe C, or maybe let me just say country. For country in African country, so I want to print maybe something like performing operation performing operation on the country. So I'm performing operation on this country. So but if I print, it will print out performing operation on Algeria, Angola, up to the last one, Zimbabwe. But this is not what I want. I don't want this. So I want it to break. Maybe let's assume when it gets to let's say Libya, just before Madagascar, let's say Libya. So let me check for that condition. So instead of performing operation on all the countries, I want it to stop when a condition is met. So that's where we make use of the break statement. So before it perform operation on the country, I want to check this condition. If the country variable, that is this one, the current country in the loop, is equal to Libya, then I want it to just break. So if this condition is not met, it will continue to perform operation on the country. So let's run it. So you can see instead of having the entire countries, it stops at Liberia, because Liberia was the last country before Libya. If I check the list, you can see we have Liberia, which is the last country before Libya. So after I finish performing operation on Liberia, then it stopped before it goes to Libya. So this is the last country before Libya, and that is why it stopped at on Liberia. So that is the concept of the break statement. Then on the other hand, the continue statement. The continue statement will continue when a condition is met. So let me go back to the note and copy it to the Jupyter notebook. So here I'm going to copy the section on the continue statement. So go back to the Jupyter notebook, paste. So here, as you can see, continue is used to skip the current loop item and then continue to the next iteration of the loop. So here we are looping over the same variable, which is the African countries. Then we are now checking if the current country ends with A, then we should continue. It means if the current country ends with A, it will skip it and then go to the next country. So this is just a function that is used to check the end of a string. So it is a string function. So if I let me demonstrate how it works, so that you, let's say we have a string called Nigeria. It's going to be a string, so it's going to be inside quotes. So Nigeria. So Nigeria is a string. It's a normal string. So if I use the ends with, if I say ends with Q or W, I need to use the dot here. That is why it's throwing the error of syntax error. So Nigerian dot ends with W, the result is false, because the string doesn't end with W, it ends with A. So if I change it to A and then test it, the result is true. You can also use multiple more than one character. For example, like AI here. If I say ends with AI, the result will be true. But if I say ends with maybe YA, sorry, the result should be false. So, but here we are just checking for the last character, A. So that is how the ends with function works. There is also the one that starts with. You can also use the starts with. The starts with, it means you're going to change this end to not be starts with A. This should be false. But if you say starts with N, This should be false because this is n in lowercase, while this is n in capital in uppercase. So if I change this to uppercase n, the result should be true. So that is how the end with or start with works. So we are checking for the condition if the string, if the current name of country in the African countries list ends with A, then we want the program to continue. We don't want it to stop. We want it to skip it. So the continue statement is used for skipping an item within the loop. So it will skip it and then continue. So if I run this, you see that it will print out all the countries that end with A will be skipped. So all the countries that ends with A will be skipped. For example, Nigeria will be missing, and other countries that ends with A, like Eritrea, Equatorial Guinea, Ethiopia, all will be missing from this list because they will be skipped. So the continue statement is used to skip an item in the loop. It will skip it and then continue with the next item in the for loop. So that is the concept of the continue statement. That is how the continue statement works. So if you check, Kenya too will be skipped. So that is how it works. So if you want a different thing, let's say we want to check like Burkina Faso, Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo. So this one they end with O. So if I change this to O, so all the countries that end with O will be skipped. So as you can see, you can no longer see Burkina Faso here. You can no longer see Democratic Republic of Congo here. So the same thing if I change the one that starts with E, Sierra Leone, Lome, all will be missing. If I change it to ends with E, and then you will see that all the countries that end with E, they will be missing. So that is how it works. So let's go back to see what we have next on our Python script. So the next thing we have there is the pass statement. So the pass statement is used to have or put an empty for loop. So it is used to write an empty for loop within your script. So assuming you want to loop over certain object or certain sequence, like a list in this case, we'll be using list in this case. So assuming you want to loop over this African country list. So if I try this, maybe for A in African countries. So if I leave it at this, if I leave the script as it is and I click run, I'll have an error. So to avoid having this error, I can just use pass so that I can leave it blank and then come back later on. It won't cause error in my script, but I'll be able to work on it later on in future. So here I just use the country code, which I believe was defined earlier on in this. It was defined somewhere here, yeah. So this is the country code. So it's just a list that has the abbreviated country names. So it was defined earlier on. So if I check the content, this is the content of the country code. So for CD in country code, let's just say pass. So pass is used to leave a for loop empty. It is used to ignore a block of code. So that is what the pass does, and it doesn't do anything special. So I'm creating a for loop, but I'm not ready to use it. So instead of leaving it the way it is like this, which will cause error when I run the script, so I will just use the pass to pass the block of code. So it will allow the script to read the code and then pass it to the next line without causing error. So you cannot leave an empty for loop or while loop, but instead of leaving it empty, then you can use the pass statement to avoid getting an error within the block of code. So that is what the pass statement does. So in the next video lesson, I'm going to start solving problems using what we have learned so far. So we are going to solve a couple of problems before we take a look at another different topic in this series. So till then, I wish you the best of learning and see you in the next one. Bye bye.